Good evening, everyone, and good morning to those that will listen to this on the audio version later. I am your host, Jason Miles, and welcome to another episode of the Mau Mau Hour, brought to you by the wonderful people at This is Revolution Podcast. If you are new to the channel, please hit like and subscribe. It is a passive gesture that goes a long way. If you are a returning listener, subscriber, or one of our very valued patrons, hell yeah. So glad you guys are here for this one. As I said, this is the Mau Mau Hour. And for the last few years, we had special music for the show, but a few things were lost as we had to change over services that we do these live streams on. And sadly, that was one of those things. So hopefully Jean Bajlan will make us a new, or Quinn, a new intro to the Mau Mau. I loved the old one, and it just doesn't seem right doing this show without that introduction music. That being said, let me bring in the man of the Mau Mau Hour. He is the Pascal Robert.
Peace and greetings to the chat. Peace and greetings to the audience. Peace and greetings, Jason Miles. No Mau Mau music.
It doesn't feel right.
It doesn't feel right
without
Mau Mau music.
Right. We got to hear Glenn's voice.
I know.
Right. That I will obey all orders of the Mau Mau.
Wow. Classic. Classic.
That's the best part. And then when the guest today was like, "Hey, can we do a Mau Mau on this?" He was familiar with the show, and I was like, yeah. But by that time, we had switched over to this different service and lost all our intro and outro stuff. So, we lost the Champagne Room music as well.
I know.
So much. Oh. But what do we have in store today, Pascal? Tell the people.
Author Louis Bourgeois talked to us about a book talking about the lives of prisoners in Parchman Prison, Unit 29. And we're going to talk about the book, what brought it together, and basically the lives of these individuals and what they're going through.
Okay, well, let's bring in our guest today. Please welcome Louis Bourgeois.
Jason and Pascal, thank you for letting me appear on your show. Any show that calls himself a Mau Mau, I'm very interested in being a part of.
Well, thank you so much for just reaching out and putting this book in our hands. Pascal, I know you have some questions for Mr. Bourgeois.
Absolutely. Louis, Parchman is one of the most notorious prison systems in Mississippi. Rarely do such places exude any light worthy of recognition. Now, because of this small piece of literature, you put together the writings of over 30 student inmates to express their feelings about the condition in Parchman. Unit 29 is the book that we're talking about. What is the impetus behind this work, and how did it come together?
Well, initially, this book, the writings in this book take place post the now, I guess, famous riots in 29, which took place in late December of 2019 and the earlier part of 2020. And then the pandemic hit, and access to Parchman was limited even by us, and we had been there for years, teaching writing and gathering writing for collections. And so after the pandemic had lifted a bit, we were actually asked to go to 29 and offer our workshops because the people in charge there thought that our classes could help relieve stress, 29 is a very stressful place to be. And so when we first went there, I was there by myself teaching in the segregated zone. So segregation in 29 means if you have certain kinds of violations, you are segregated off from the general population of the rest of the unit. And these were the students that I was working with. And so they couldn't be let out to join any kind of a classroom situation. So I did one-on-one with each of these students in three different buildings in 29, in the segregated buildings. And that was, gosh, I mean, it's kind of all exemplified in the book. If you read the book, you will see exactly what we're talking about here. But it was a chaotic mess, and it was very difficult to attempt to teach in that situation. So then I kind of gave up the idea of teaching. I'm like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to help them get their stories or voices sort of translated as best we can and onto the page. All right. So then it just became an issue of like getting back there, trying to find out what they want the world to know, and then getting all that out of there, and then getting it typed up, and then put into a publication. And that's essentially what we did. I mean, like there's very little literary pretense involved here. I kind of gave up on that. I thought what we were attempting to do was to show the absolute pure situation in these segregated zones in 29. And this went on for about 2 years. And then finally, we were allowed to have a class up front in the gymnasium primarily, in which the texture of the writing does take a bit of a turn. But for the most part, what we have here is the sort of 29 distilled in its purest aspect, you might say. If you ask me questions, because
I have a question. I'm from California, and I know our prison systems are a little different between California and Mississippi. Do you feel you have a harder time trying to get the people of Mississippi, because there's something about Southern prisons in general where you definitely are an extreme minority when you're fighting for the rights of people incarcerated in places like this? I have a friend that covers Alabama. I actually am in contact with some gentlemen that are incarcerated in Alabama. Very, very different conditions in which these people exist in than the people that I know that came out of California prisons. And some of them have come out into six-figure jobs, definitely in the nonprofit world. But and this is after committing capital felonies. What are the challenges that you have in trying to, bring awareness in a place like Mississippi?
Well, that's a good thing to say. Let me start off by saying that so like programs like we have here, this is old hat where you are. I mean, California and New York were like the first places to offer sort of humanities-based education, in the country, like, well over half a century ago. So for you guys, this kind of thing is not new. But in Mississippi, actually, our organization, Vox, was the first one to start it over a decade ago. No one was working with prisoners on writing or anything else. And then since then, other groups have been involved, and so that kind of education is starting to slowly get out into the prison system. But in this book, in Unit 29, we kind of went beyond that, because of all the issues that were happening in 29. and because the teaching conditions were just you couldn't teach. It was just a chaotic mess. Just read the book. I mean, you've got fires lit in the zone. There's smoke everywhere. One of the most disruptive facts that I went through was like the televisions. They put these televisions on the center of the zones, and they're always blaring, and it became impossible to really work with just the noise level. But I'm sorry, Jason, I forgot what your original.
No, I'm just asking about the challenges that you have.
The challenges.
Beyond just the challenges of trying to teach in a prison environment, which it's going to vary.
Well,
you have varying levels of education that you're dealing with all at once. So it's got to be like teaching a multi-grade classroom.
It's really interesting. I think the people, at least the students, and I've been doing this for over a decade, the students that I've worked with, somehow, even the context of Mississippi, have come to me with enough basic skills to get their story across, generally speaking. And I think maybe it's because the people who would even consider, taking a creative writing class in a Mississippi prison must already have some wherewithal in that direction and some basic skills. So it's not as aggravated as you might think, because to begin with, we're not teaching for a grade, right? We're teaching for a literary effect, you might say. And so there's that aspect, because what we're interested in is to get authentic stories from our students and the way that they want to tell the world what's going on. We kind of follow their lead in that regard. We give them the materials, we give them the instructions that they request to get their point across. So in that case, it's a bit different than a normal classroom. But it was interesting is that we've never really had a bad class, because the one thing about a Mississippi prison, this is true in all prisons, but it's particularly aggravated in Mississippi because it's the most impoverished state in the country. But the greatest arguably the greatest culprit is boredom itself. And so our students are typically very enthusiastic about whatever might be offered. And so we've had very, very few situations where people are not into the class, and not willing to go the distance to do the best work that they can.
I wanted to ask you about the students as well. How are they chosen for this particular book?
For this book, whoever wanted to do it, whoever could write on a basic level. We could only take so many because there's only so many students that we could cover. Whoever had a genuine interest in taking the class. We did have an assessment test of a sort, just to see where they were in terms of their writing abilities. But generally, it was whoever wanted to participate was able to.
Another question I had. Some of these stories are, I shouldn't say some, every story is extremely personal, right? This is a moment where you get to put pen to paper and kind of expose your soul a little bit. Some of them really hit home for me, as I know people in similar situations where you've committed maybe a capital felony and it's destroyed family. There was one of the, it's early on in the book. One of the stories is a person that commits, I think, a capital felony. It doesn't really say what he did, but he does say that whatever he did broke up his family, and he decided to take a plea deal because he caused so much turmoil within the family. Once you quote unquote open some of these guys up to be so vulnerable, Did that make the process more difficult?
That's a good question. I don't recall that occurring with this particular project. But at one point, I had brought in someone who wanted to try to write an experiment that dealt with dreams. Right. The idea was to capture dreams and to try to write about them. That didn't last very long. Because what it did was it re-traumatized some people and the reactions were not good. And so I shut that down. The vulnerability is already there, I think, for this particular project, just because of where we were. I mean, they've been stripped of everything where most of these stories come from, which is the most extreme part of the prison system in general in Mississippi, but particularly this unit, because Unit 29 is a large unit, and there's, I think, there's upwards to 12 different zones in this unit. We were more or less focused on 3 different sections of the unit, and the most extreme and isolated, and you might say a deprived part of the unit, and that's where most of this work comes from. Vulnerability. I don't recall having a student in this collection who refused to not go as far as they could in terms of vulnerability. I asked them to be honest, and they were as honest as they could be. There were a couple actually that were too honest, and we couldn't publish that stuff.
They had trials coming up. Could have ruined your appeal.
Even for me, because like my mantra, not a mantra, but what my leading and teaching instruction is this. It's like you're never going as far as you think, right? So allow yourself to go as far as you initially need to go, and we can edit stuff out later. Because oftentimes, particularly in Mississippi, there's all this kind of weird self-censorship going on, and that ends up with a lot of just circular, rhetorical type of abstract writing that is not readable. So that was one thing I had to work with them on. Say no, I gave them samples of the kind of writing that they could do to give them some sense of a range. And once they got it, they took off with it. Particularly the poet in there, Brian Kirk. We had read some of Etheridge Knight, who is one of the first famous prison poets, and he was originally from Mississippi and did most of his time in Illinois. And Brian Kirk saw the connection and just ran with it, and he came up with his own Etheridge Knight, and we're actually from this book. The book's been out a few months now. We are now working with some of the writers individually on full collections from them, because the response has been just amazing. And but yeah, that's a good question, Jason. Vulnerability and writing in prison.
I spent time working with unhoused people in the Bay Area where I'm from, and that was a warning I got from other unhoused people. They're like, "Oh, you about to open these dudes up, man." And they're gonna be coming to you all the time once you do that. But to me, it's just part of the job at a certain point. When you say you're going to take this kind of stuff on, then it's just part of what you do. But I don't know.
Well, what did you experience? What did you experience on the streets?
Oof.
you know,
a lot of and I'm sure there's tons of similarities, right? Because you're dealing with people that have definitely been incarcerated, different levels.
sure.
I think you deal with a lot of pain and undiagnosed trauma. And it's important to remind people that they're not defective. And I was lucky enough to grow up with an inquisitive grandparent that made me question everything. Because had I not, I probably would have accepted some things as a 47-year-old that grew up in the 80s and 90s in a moment of a lot of underclass ideology as rationale for criminal behavior. I'm from a place called Richmond, California, which, you know, it's probably not as bad as Jackson, Mississippi, but it's similar. Show me a place where there's no jobs. I'll show you a place where there's drug problems and teenage pregnancy and the like. So there's a universality that I think I understand from people in certain areas, but just questioning those statistics that used to be, you know, so in your face. And Pascal, you know exactly what I'm talking about. 1 out of 4 black men will be either incarcerated or dead by the age of 18. Was kind of beat over our heads. And then we had the propaganda arm, which was to some degree hip hop and the cinema that followed, movies like Menace to Society and Boys in the Hood, which really say that there is just this defective Negro or defective poor person. And I've worked in the South years later. And that's the hardest thing to try to remind people at a certain point, that that these are problems of poverty, but not the problems of your moral defectiveness. Pascal, do you want to add on that?
Yeah, I mean, one of the questions that I wanted to juxtapose to you is that how do you keep remembering that these are human beings in such abject difficulty, in such environments where their humanity is constantly stripped from them? How does your attempt to maintain connection with their humanity as the person who is overseeing this project persist in an environment that really does nothing to support that humanity at all?
Yeah, that's because I'm with them. Okay, I'm with them. You know, like I didn't grow up here. You know, in North Mississippi. I grew up around New Orleans, but working class, and life lessons. You know, so like I have no. It's not hard for me to be on their side and see it from their perspective. I mean, for example, you know, so like Parchman, you know, its real name is the Mississippi State Penitentiary. It's in Sunflower County, and I have to do these grants and whatnot, you know, because we're a nonprofit, and that's how we sustain ourselves. And yeah, you were mentioning statistics, and they're absurd, of course. But right, so like I think in Sunflower County, where Parchman is housed, you know, the poverty rate is 40% or something. Unemployment's 25%. You know, just some outrageous stuff. But the question is, you know, like you're kind of getting at was like, what do these numbers really mean though? Like, how do they help reverse anything, right? I mean, so then like the only thing you can do, you know, is you know, look at it from a human perspective. And so if I'm in 29 with this complete maddening situation, how could I ever look at straight society, you know, in a way that I can show any respect for it? You know, I mean, I don't know if it's like it's not hard for me to have sympathy for the inmates. It's much harder for me to have sympathy for the rest of
of
straight Anglo society.
I get it. When you're dealing with a population that has committed some serious crimes, and there was a very popular book at the end of the aughts, I believe, is when it comes out, The New Jim Crow, which, I don't know if you read Mr. Bourgeois, but I think Pascal and I read. Maybe not the biggest fan of, because it really, to me, doesn't paint an accurate picture. And because of that picture not being so accurate, I think it actually does more harm than good in the way that we view incarcerated individuals. I mean, one of the big themes of that book is that prisons are filled with quote unquote nonviolent offenders, and everything is just a drug offense. It's not necessarily 100% true. But even though there's quote unquote violent offenders, there's still human beings. And I think because of the oversimplification of that book, it gives people a reason to continue to have those negative feelings, those tough on crime feelings that we saw work to our detriment in the 90s.
You guys are pretty learned. Have you read Sartre's essay on Jean Genet, Saint Genet? Don't try to read the whole book; it becomes incomprehensible. But initially, he talks about how the bourgeoisie manufactures its own monsters, right? And he uses this example of in old Bohemia, they would take a child and stuff it in a box to stunt its growth, and then split its lips and do stuff to its ears and make little dwarf monsters, right? That's kind of how I see the prison system, is that you're creating monsters for your own utility and your own amusement, And where do you start? Where do you begin with who's truly guilty and who's not? I mean, I don't know, but this country commits crimes by the minute, and we're supposed to accept them.
Pascal,
what exactly is the point that you are trying to make to society about the incarcerated? Do you think that the moment of anti-carceral, anti-prison activism has kind of gone to the wayside somewhat because of the rise of crime post-COVID? Because there was a moment in time in the earlier aughts where there was this wave of people who seemed to be writing about the dangers of incarceration, anti-mass incarceration activism, and scholarship was really at the forefront. Do you feel that time has gone by, and what exactly do you seek to try to achieve with your publishing of that book right now?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, so you're asking, the whole. Well, at one point, there was a general wave toward prison abolition that seems to have played out a little bit, because it's like, what can you actually do to change anything? I mean, one thing you can do, and I have seen this work with organizations, is you just go down to the state Congress and just bug them until they change something. I've seen it happen in Louisiana. They finally got rid of, when you apply for a job and you have to X in the thing, have you ever been convicted of a crime? Well, they eliminated that just by going to the state Congress when they were in session and just basically making them do it. You can do that. You can go and hands-on is very important stuff. But the greater structural issues, the industry of incarceration is so huge now. Right under the military and a couple of other things. How do you budget? So, that's why I wanted to publish this book, and why I'll publish several more books just like it, is just to show the human element and hope something can come from it. What, I don't know. I'm at a loss, like anyone else, as to how to actually move this this machine. I don't know. You do what you can and hope something will come of it. But this thing has grown beyond comprehension almost.
Do you see yourself as being part of an anti-carceral or anti-incarceration kind of movement with the kind of books that you're trying to publish out?
I'm against anything that is tormenting other human beings, whether it's incarceration or otherwise. But prisons is kind of where we gravitate toward. I'm against everything that is obviously oppressive, and we'll keep publishing, because that's our way of fighting. It's all we know how to do.
So what exactly are the effects that this kind of book is having on the actually inmates and the students in Unit 29? How has this affected their lives?
Well, it's very personal, and that they're very pleased that their works are getting out into the world in a real way. I think we have an international audience at this point. They're also receiving compensation when possible, real compensation, which is a big deal for them. But with the students who have really pursued their writing, those are the ones that who have really benefited, because they have become writers via the program and via the publication.
Is there any chances of gaining any kind of broader access to the book in terms of media or exposing it in terms of where it's published or where it's shown? Have you worked to try to increase access to it?
Well, yeah, I contacted you guys to see if you could help get the word out about it. I'm constantly contacting newspapers and magazines to see if they can let people know about it. We've had some radio, very limited television, and then I think this is our first true podcast interview.
Kind of back to what I was asking you before, Mr. Bourgeois, about trying to gain outside support. Mississippi in general, is there a lot of support for any programs for prisoners in the city that the prison's in the state?
There has been some over the past, I would say, 5 or 6 years. The Mississippi Humanities Council, they got a grant, I believe, from the Rockefeller Foundation.
Oh wow!
They're able to offer some college classes to some inmate students. The University of Mississippi, they do offer I believe 2 classes for college credit, which is great, because that's more opportunities for the inmates. However, that's only reaching a very few people. There's 22,000 inmates in Mississippi, and only a few are offered those programs, and so there's a lot that can obviously be done. There's 22,000 inmates, and I believe 18 prisons in the state. And we're a small state.
So you have an overcrowding issue, is what you're saying.
That's a lot of people locked up,
Kind of pulling back a bit from that point. Opportunity in Mississippi doesn't seem to be abundant. We've had Kali Akuno on the show a few times, who worked with Cooperation Jackson Do you work with any of those types of organizations with what you're doing with the prisons? Do they reach out to you at all?
We used to work with the Humanities Council, and then COVID happened, and then we kind of like got split off from them, and we've gone mostly independent since then. I do have organizations asking for access, say to Parchman, but we have been operating pretty much on our own since the pandemic lifted.
Pascal, do you want to follow up on that?
No, I mean, I wanted to ask, so basically, pretty much most of the writing for this started after the pandemic occurred. What exactly was the daily organizing of the writing habits to collect the actual samples of the 30 participants? How did you organize the actual day-to-day aspect of them coming together for the book?
Well, so initially, I would drive to Parchman, and I would go to the zone, and I would teach one-on-one because they couldn't be let out of the cells, and so it was a once a week class. I would give them an assignment to work on during the week, and then I'd return the next Friday. It was on a Friday that we taught, and I would gather the work, and then we talk about the work, and that way we decided what we ultimately wanted to publish, what we ultimately wanted the world to read.
Pascal?
No, that just
in COVID, I had a friend who used to work with he was a guard at San Quentin, and he told me that during the early days of the pandemic, San Quentin actually was one of those epicenters for outbreaks early on, and the guards actually did fight the warden to try to segregate the prisoners that they had, that they were getting, that were COVID positive, because it ripped through the prison, killing several inmates and guards in the process. And then the state had sued prison system, so prisoners couldn't get let out even when they had served their sentence. Was it a similar situation for you in Mississippi?
Well, I wasn't at Parchman in the midst of the pandemic. It was kind of like middle part of 2021, so I wasn't I wasn't privy to what was happening with COVID at a base level. But from what I understand, the outbreaks were limited, and I don't know why exactly, because most people said, well, everybody's, they're housed together. It's going to be really bad. But also no one was coming in from the outside, so perhaps it was contained. But as far as I know, there were no major outbreaks or any kind of conflict resulting from COVID within Parchman.
So I guess you guys are better than California on that one.
Well, yeah, we're a lot smaller too. I mean, California has a mass prison system.
Pretty big.
Yeah.
Pretty big. Is this work, and this might be too personal of a question, I'll start by being honest myself.
Okay.
I walked away from the work I was doing because of issues with the administration. I was working for a nonprofit.
Okay.
So, there's limits to how much of my leftism that they're going to put up with. Right. And I'm a knucklehead. I'll throw that in there. And I walked away. There were some other circumstances that led me to walk away, but I walked away. I feel that anyone that works with certain populations are doing, and I don't say this facetiously, the Lord's work, because it's very, very hard work it's extremely thankless. And if anything, you get kind of public pity from your peers. That can turn into resentment from your peers. What keeps you doing this kind of work?
That's a very simple question. What keeps me going is the talent that we discover, like and the process of offering these classes and we're publishing these anthologies. As I say, we're about to begin publishing single writers from the prison system in Mississippi, and I'm just astounded by just the raw talent, and that keeps me going. I go through the exact thing you just described sometimes, and then I feel like myself maybe slipping away, and then I'll come across some great writing from the program, and that makes me want to continue. And also, I think it's important, and it has to be done. But, so to answer your question, what keeps me going? I guess the question is it's discovering raw talent, in the prison system.
Interesting, because it's it's extremely thankless work. That
Yes.
If you're doing it to get an award, do something else.
I don't even think in terms of
go teach blind kids at a public school. Somebody will care about you more. Or do like Ken Carter did and tell your basketball team they didn't all make C's and you're going to cancel the basketball season and Disney will make a movie about you. But if you're working with the population that society has deemed disposable, A, you're not going to make a lot of money. B, nobody cares. There's a handful of people with bleeding hearts that'll donate to these organizations here and there, but it's really hard work. So I just want to applaud you for doing what you do, sir.
Thank you, Jason. I appreciate it. And yeah, we will keep going. I'm stubborn and arrogant enough to keep going. I really believe in what we're doing, and we will not stop.
The question I want to ask you is that,
let's go.
Why is it that the exposure of this book has not forced Unit 29 to consider the treatment of the inmates or the students under the fear of consideration that the brutality of that conditioning is so bad?
Well, we're hoping that might be the outcome. Of course, it could backfire on us too. We don't know yet. The book has really just been released. I mean, it was officially online in December, but it was really the last 6 weeks that we started to really let people know about it. So we don't really, it's kind of early on to know what effect we're having. We just think it's an honest take on what has occurred and what is occurring, and we'll see what happens. We'll see what the reaction is. To say it's still pretty early on. Nothing concrete has occurred yet.
In 2020, we have this swell of protests over the murder of George Floyd. I mean, there's other reasons why these protests happen, but just for all intents and purposes, let's just say it's because of the murder of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and some other police killings that had happened in the years before. And people are calling not just for possibly the defunding of police, but also to rethink the way we do punishment, right? A lot of people in 2018, not a lot, but there was quite a few people running as district attorneys on ending cash bail. We were really looking at the carceral system as problematic and not as reformative. I feel like that moment has changed in just those 5 years, and there's been a massive cultural shift to want to lock up the ne'er-do-wells of society, which is interesting to me because, again, growing up in a very violent time, it's not necessarily as violent as it was 30 years ago if we just look at murder rates and violent crime rates. These things still exist,
Yeah.
but not as bad as they were 30 years ago, mainly because who's a bigger drug dealer than the private healthcare system in 2025? There's no Nino Browns of fentanyl. So you're dealing with guys that are getting kingpin cases for either making meth in their own hotel room that they're staying in to survive, or selling prescriptions and prescription drugs, again, not making anywhere near, not having the criminal enterprises to the size of anything we saw in the 80s and 90s because of the ability to take powder cocaine, cook it into crack, blah, 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 blah. The rest is history. Have you seen a shift as well in public sentiment for incarcerated individuals where it comes to that people just don't care what goes on beyond these walls?
I mean, it's a good question. What's weird, at least with respect to our program, how to put it, both the left and the right seem to have some claim on incarceration on a moral plane. I don't really see it that way because I'm just dealing with the practical ends of keeping the program together. Seems to me that both the left and the right think they have an answer to this, which of course they don't, because at least in terms of Mississippi, it's getting worse. I don't want to just just quickly go through your question, but obviously because Mississippi is the most impoverished place in the country, obviously you're going to have this correlation with criminality, but in terms of people's sympathy or whatever toward it, as I say, politically we are left alone for the most part. Of course, I don't know with this book, what kind of reaction we're going to get from people. As I say, it's just been released really. So far, the reaction has not been negative so far. I don't know. Both sides think that they have an answer, but I haven't seen anyone come up with anything that works.
Pascal?
Have you had any kind of communication with people in political spaces about the book?
Not this book. Some of our previous books, we've had politicians use the writing, as to serve some purpose that they wanted to get across to their audience. But so far, this book, no, we have not encountered any politicians who have read it yet or have anything to say about it.
I mean, I don't know how to frame this without sounding like a douche nozzle, and I apologize if I do. I'm not trying to. But do you think prison reform is a bit of a political albatross in 2025 and moving forward with the way it was used against Kamala? I mean, I don't know about Mississippi, but I know kind of throughout the country that ad about she's for the they them when she said she was going to give every trans person in prison.
Jason, I'm not. I watch your show, and
Yeah.
I watch some shows like this. I'm not that politically minded. I'm very, I don't know. I was thinking about this the other day. I'm sort of suspicious of any kind of reform because thinking I'm not a scholar actually on penology, but prison itself was seen initially in this country as reform, right? Because prior to prisons, they would just torture you, right, out in the public square, or whatever, do all that kind of stuff. So it was liberal people who actually came up with separating people from society and not torturing them so overtly. So prison itself was seen as reform, and so now that we've had prison all these years, seems like anytime there's some kind of reform, something worse comes from it. So I'm actually very suspicious when people talk about reform, because you're talking about prison. How much reform could you have with it?
You can give them yoga mats.
No?
Yeah,
I'm not saying that those are bad things, and
no, I was being facetious on that.
I'm not saying that, but it's still a house of detention, right? It's still like, how do you actually reform that? I mean, I don't know. That's why I wanted to talk with you guys. Like, I want your perspective on it.
For me, look, I'll cede to Pascal. You look like you want to say something, Pascal.
No, I mean, for me, it's about decreasing the amount of time that we give for these offenses, so that we don't have to require that you have to do 30 years for a smash and grab or something like that. So we can find some. I mean, I think one of the reforms is to make rehabilitation possible again. In other words, teach people skills in prison so that when they get out, they can actually find work and make them functioning members of society, so that when they come out, they're whole instead of broken. That's where I would focus on.
But would you guys both agree that, again, back to the question about kind of the political football that gets thrown around, and it's going to be homelessness, housing, and definitely the carceral state? This is a population that it's easy to point a finger at, especially if they reoffend. And I'll give you an example that maybe you guys are aware of. There was all those fires that broke out in California. One of the fire chiefs, a Riverside fire chief, got stabbed to death by her wife. Did you guys see that?
No.
In your news? She got stabbed to death by her wife. Her wife took off to this region of Mexico that I live in. And a friend of mine who committed a capital felony, who's deported to this region of Mexico, that lady was her cellmate. And that woman had killed someone before. 30 or 40 years before, she killed someone. The public sentiment was, why did she get out in the first place? Don't you people know what these people do?
Yeah,
and again, my friend, I know you work in a prison. You know a lot of people that have committed felonies like that. I've gotten to know and work with a pretty decent sized amount of people that have committed capital crimes that will never reoffend.
No, most murderers don't reoffend, because typically, that's an oddball thing that happens usually in the moment, and so murderers are your best students, and they're very, particularly in Mississippi, in that Mississippi, when you're charged with that, you will never get out. And that's just the way the law is structured. So there's a strange resignation that comes with a student who's been sentenced for murder in Mississippi. They have to be my favorite students. But I don't know how to answer that. I mean, the people who are in for those kind of crimes to begin with is a very small number of people. at least has been in my experience, you know, Parchman and other facilities where we operate, you know, most of my students are, you know, victims of circumstance or just screw ups. You know, we have a lot of those. You hardly call these people, you know, evil.
Yeah.
I don't want to sound like a cliche here, but I'm trying.
No,
but you call yourself the Mau Mau Hour. I should be able to say a little more than I'm accustomed to on this topic.
Well, you want to make sure we want you to make sure you keep getting funding. Watch what you say.
Well, that's never happened to any great extent, so I'm not worried about that. But like I wanted to ask you, Pascal and Jason. So have you read? This is you guys from California, George Jackson.
Blood in My Eye, classic book.
It's in my room. Yeah.
I like this book because basically it's a fantasy he has of overthrowing major urban centers, right?
Mm-hmm.
I didn't get to read it. It's been a while, about 10 years since I read it, but like I remember, you know, Blood in My Eye was all about, you know, and which is amazing to me because like George Jackson, we went to the 6th grade or something, and he's totally well versed in his marks. It's unbelievable. But Blood in My Eye, you know, it's like just like this fantasy of overthrowing these urban governments. And he makes a really good case for it and shows you specifically, practically how to do it, right? What was my point in saying that? So that's the kind of energy I'm into, right? And this is the Mau Mau.
This is where you're supposed to, you know, release that energy in these kind of difficult conversations, because I think that's the big problem as I've seen in California with, you know, when I talk with my friend that's deported here, right? She's been here for about almost 10 years. She grew up in Los Angeles. She committed a capital crime. She did her time, and then she got thrown out, right? She serves the double sentence. There's quite a few people here where I live in Mexico that served the double sentence. They did their time.
That's yeah.
And you're disconnected from your family. That's another reason why I hate the open borders talk, because they are not open. She can't just, you know, go over and visit family. But not too many people are fighting for these people to have second chances, right, on the outside. So to Pascal's point about give them skills inside, yada, yada, yada. My friend, again, when she was inside for the majority of her life, half her life, she was in a prison cell. She learned how to be a dental assistant. She got her AA, right? She's not the only person like that. But she couldn't even get a job in a place where dentistry is the industry because so many Americans come over here.
Yeah, but you know, I could easily see yeah, if you're getting skills like that, that's one thing. I'm not arguing against that at all. But like say in Mississippi, we have all these enormous chicken factories, you know, where they process chicken. And so like, you know, what they're, you know, I mean, I don't, as I say, I'm a writing instructor. I don't really know that much about this, but it's just like, you know, they're just looking for cheap labor, and, you know, they can just pluck it from the prisons. And I think that's not any good at all, you know. What's the difference between that and legalized slavery, when you're just like plucking out the population that you can exploit the most, you know, work people for cents an hour.
So do you think that this population is just primed for this new weird moment that we're getting of possible uber neoliberalism with privatization everywhere, and then you'll have a more exploited population that you can
they'll be doubly exploited, right? So I mean, it's like, yeah, I can see that happening easily. So, you know, so Pascal was like, well, what about, you know, the skills and all? Like, that's obviously good on some level, but I don't trust I don't trust society enough to where they're not going to exploit that and work people, even skilled labor, for as little as they can get. You know, that's the whole point of this system, is to make as much profit as you can without paying, to get to paying anyone what they're actually worth. That's just the nature of this machine. So I could easily see how you could have inmates, who are taught all these things, and then when they get out, they're just exploited for their skills. So I mean, what has been accomplished there?
I mean, yeah, imagine being able to have, journeyman level carpenters that you can pay $5 an hour to, and they're going to say that's better than the 5 cents an hour I was getting inside. Or
justify anything,
right? The limited job opportunities that are offered to the fire camp people in California. So it's I think when I hear people talk about prison, it's always spoken about in an abstraction, because first and foremost, you have to have a certain kind of safety net when people get out, and I think the social safety net it just doesn't exist in the States, first and foremost, and it's just getting exponentially worse. It feels like with each administration. So, what world are these people being unleashed into? Especially if you've been in there for a drug crime in the 90s or even the 2000s, again, when crack was a thing. Like, all those skills you had are gone. like, hey, man, sorry, brother. They're not cooking it like they used to. It's a little different.
Yeah, I think I don't have an answer. We're just simply recording the experiences and letting the public hopefully do something with these experiences. I don't know what. I don't have a whole lot of faith in societal reform. I do believe in the individual writers being able to make some kind of impact, hopefully on themselves, if nothing else. But, I don't want to sound like a cliche, but yeah, I think, just like the Rage Against the Machine song, the structure is sick. You're not going to be able to change it with voting, but I don't, that's.
Oh no, we can't vote our way out of this one.
Yeah, it's just sick. It's I don't know what has to happen. I mean, but the system is very sick.
Pascal, do you want to say anything before we get off? It's been an hour.
I think that giving voice to people who have been rejected by society and allowing them to empower themselves with a pen gives hope to at least that segment of society.
Yeah. Completely agree. Yeah.
Mr. Bourgeois, would you like to say anything before we end?
Thank you for letting us tell the world about this book. It is an important book. I think it'll stand on its own, and I hope that people who read it, can really understand what's going on here in Mississippi, particularly at Unit 29 of Parchman.
Quick question: will they be able to see this show? Will you be able to show it to them?
How do you mean? No.
Like, can you show them? See it.
There are ways to get
it in there.
Yeah.
I just asked because I'll send you my mailing address if people want.
Yeah, I can get it shown, particularly in Unit 29. Actually, yeah.
But again, Mr. Bourgeois, I want to thank you for the work that you're doing. Hopefully, this inspires someone else to do something similar wherever they live. It's a heavy lift. You have strong shoulders, sir.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
Pascal Robert, you have
Yes,
anything
sir.
to say as we go out of here?
No, I appreciated this episode. It was a very, very important conversation.
Thank you guys, and let's go out with some chill cartoons. We are out. See you tomorrow.